Well, we're in early March, and this particular year, Easter falls at the end of March, on March the 31st. And we want to turn our attention in this series that we're starting today that I've called Another Fine Mess. And we want to be looking toward the glorious hope that is the Easter season for us. The idea of another fine mess goes back to like some characters, and again, I don't really remember watching a lot of their movies or TV shows, but it was a phrase that was kind of popular, if you will, when I was a kid. What's another fine mess that you have gotten us into? It went back to Laurel and Hardy and that concept or that idea. And maybe for some of you who are listening, that maybe it brings back a fond memory of a fun movie or show that you remember that featured the characters. But reality is, when you think about like what it was about, a lot of TV shows and movies follow that very simple model. The first few minutes or half hour of the movie or TV show will be about how they got into the mess. And then the balance of the show is how they get out of the mess. And that's just, if you will, not just TV shows and movies, that's life. Maybe for you look back and you think about your life, and it has just been a series of messes, if you will. Sometimes the messes didn't really have anything to do with us. They just happened to us, but it doesn't change the fact that we have to deal with them. You might think of a natural disaster. Maybe a storm passes through and a tree goes down. You didn't really have anything to do with it, but it happened on your property, and so now you've got to clean up a mess. Maybe you open the refrigerator door and somebody didn't get the milk all the way in. And so when you open the door, out it comes. It's not your fault, but there's the mess. And so you've got to deal with it and clean it up. Sometimes the messes that we are asked to deal with are our fault. It is a mess of our own making. And I think if we could be honest with ourselves, we know that that is true. We have made decisions and put ourselves in situations where it became a problem, and it's something that we need to allow ourselves to deal with. But why talk about this, if you will, at the Easter season? Because reality is, Easter is way more than Cadbury eggs and fake green grass. It's about a Savior and a cross and an empty tomb. I think God always understood when man sinned that there was going to be a problem with messes. Our propensity to make problems. And he knew that somebody was going to have to step into the world and take care of that problem. And that plan appears to have been in position for a long time. In the book of Genesis, Chapter 3, it records for us, if you will, the fall of man. Eve eats of the fruit and she gives it to Adam, and they realize they're naked and they hide from God. And when God reveals himself to him, he has a punishment for Adam, he has a punishment for Eve, and he has a punishment for the servant. Let's pick it up there in Genesis chapter 3, verse 14. It says, "So God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all the livestock and all the wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her. He will crush your head and you will strike your heel." He says, because you have done this. Well, what exactly happened? Well, sin came into the world, and if you will, it has been a mess that mankind has been trying to deal with for a long time. But the reality is, he says, Jesus is the one who is coming in the world to clean it up. Yeah, the messes are real and legitimate. He says they will bruise his heel. The problem with sin is real and legit. It's a problem. But Jesus is going to do something. He will crush his head. Jesus, if you will clean up this mess that we have got ourselves into. And so let's look at this concept, if you will, this idea of Jesus wanting to watch out for us and clean up our messes that we can get ourselves into. Yes, another fine mess. In the book of John, chapter 8, starting the first verse, we will explore that first mess, if you will, that we want to look at. When they all had went home, Jesus went up to the Mount of Olives at dawn. He appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teacher of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman who was caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group. And they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses commands us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say?" They were using the question to trap in order to have a basis to accuse him. Jesus bent down and he started to write on the ground with his finger. And when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, "Let anyone who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and he wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." In the story, there are, if you will, three main characters. There's the woman, there are her accusers, and there's Jesus, and then there's this mess. And so let's talk a little bit about it today. Let's kind of unpack, if you will, just the story for a moment. It says that Jesus came early in the day and he's teaching there in the temple area. It says that he sat down, and this is, again, wasn't there, so I'm just assuming some things, so go with me. But he sat down, and typically you would guess in a pretty large crowd so that everybody could have seen him. Probably everybody else sat down as well. So just picture, if you would, a pretty good-sized crowd of people, but they're all sitting down. And then in come the religious leaders. They've caught this woman in adultery. She's made a mess of things. But the Bible says that they forced her to stand amongst them. I would guess that if she could have had her druthers, she probably would have knelt down like everybody else was doing who was there, so she wouldn't have stuck out so much. But apparently they wouldn't let her do that. So she is standing there, and I'm assuming probably some of the other religious leaders are as well. They're trying to make a scene. But again, I wasn't there, I don't know, but it sounds a little bit like, so Jesus stood up so that perhaps she wouldn't feel like she was the only one standing there. But I could see Jesus doing that if that's how it played out. It seems like the kind of person that he is. He will be open to joining us in our mess that we made of things. You know, the law says, Jesus, she's supposed to be stoned to death. And for whatever reason, Jesus kneels down, excuse me, and he begins to write in the ground, and they keep pestering him about, hey, you know what the law says, got it, whatever. And he stands up and he simply says, if you haven't sinned, go ahead and chuck the first stone. Well, they all had sinned, and so they all disappear, and then it's just left with Jesus. But I love that picture, if that's actually how it went, because that's the kind of person that Jesus is. A willingness to join people in the mess they have made of their life. And that's not just true of a biblical story, that's true today. So let's talk about it. She's caught in the act of adultery. If you will, this is, if she's going to be honest about it, it's a mess of her own making. It's fair to ask, where was the guy? Don't know. Not brought up. Jesus doesn't even make a point of it himself. But this is where she is. Why was she committing this act of adultery? Maybe she was a prostitute, and this was how she provided for herself and for her family. Maybe she just loved this individual, though she was in a relationship or he was in a relationship. It doesn't go into any of those things. But it doesn't change the fact that who she is. But one thing that you feel fairly confident in saying is this isn't how she saw the day going. I mean, she's probably going to have her little liaison, and then she'll go back to her lie, and he'll go back to his lie, and nobody will be any worse off for this whole thing. But today, she gets caught, and she gets drug across town, and it just all explodes. This mess isn't a private little tidy mess that they're dealing with. Now everybody knows about it. And reality is, messes are like that sometimes. We try to keep them small and contained and private, but sometimes they do just get out of hand. They get away from us. But how do we deal with them? There's a television commercial that I have used a couple times at the church. It shows a gentleman, and he's talking about the debt that he's in. You know, the beautiful house that he lives in, the brand new car that he drives. He's a member of the country club. He's cleaning some stuff out of their beautiful backyard pool. And he says, I'm in debt up to my eyeballs. Can anybody help me? Well, reality is he's in a mess, but it's private, right? Nobody really knows that it's hard for him to make the monthly payments, to make everything meet because of the mess that he has made of things. What's intriguing to me, though, is the commercial is done by Lending Tree. Now, again, I don't know anything about Lending Tree or how they work or the whole premise of them, but if we would just think about it for a moment, this guy is in all this financial trouble of his own making. How many of us actually think what he needs is another loan? And you would kind of like, I don't think that would probably help. That would probably, it feels like it would add to the mess, not clean up the mess. And that's my point. For a lot of us, we have made a mess of things, but we're just not willing to be honest about what's really going on. The problem that we have got ourselves in. It's hard for us, if you will, to have honest conversations. That's just kind of our character and our nature. We like to diminish our problems and our struggles and our circumstances, or everybody else's is worse, or whatever it is. We just have a hard time having honest conversations. I don't just feel like that's true of TV commercials or a woman in a story in the Bible. I feel like it's even true in our culture, in our world today. We just have problem after problem, and it feels like year after year after year, everybody says, just let me go to this place and I will fix the problem, but nothing ever gets fixed. Why is that? I think in large part because nobody is willing to be honest about the real character and nature of the problem. We all know there's a mess, but we just can't be honest with ourselves and with others about how to fix it. And then in our story, there are the accusers. And of course, this just feeds into the problem as well. It's this group of people who have brought this woman before Jesus, and I don't think they really care all that much about the woman, but it's a great chance to try to trap Jesus in this. But the reality is, and this is a large part of the point I think that Jesus tries to make, and why this story is recorded for us, is she's not really being super honest with herself about the mess created, but neither are these people. You see, Jesus is writing on the thing. They keep harping about the whole thing. Jesus stands up, if you are without sin, cast the first stone. Now, just out of curiosity, do you think when they got there, they didn't know they were sinners when they got there? But I think for a lot of us, that's the reality where we live. We are great at seeing and picking apart the sins and the follies of other people, but we have a tendency to look at ourselves like, I don't have any problems at all, right? I don't do anything wrong. Or if you will, my messes all get cleaned up privately. And yet Jesus today will call them out. The reality is he's always wanted to do the same thing to us. In the book of Matthew, chapter 7, it says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there is this plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first of all, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll be able to see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Just out of curiosity, how many specks do you suppose there are in a plank? Imagine just a section of wood. It could be a small piece of wood. And you had a saw in hand, and you just took that saw and your little piece of wood and you made one stroke. How many little specks from that piece of wood would fall to the ground? 5, 10, 50, 100? A bunch of them. And if you just sawed until the ball and the board was gone and you looked down, you would just have a pile of probably millions of specks. And that's the simple reality of what Jesus is trying to say. All of our lives consist of a multitude of sins that we can live completely oblivious to while we pick apart the lives of everybody else. And so they bring this woman before Jesus. She's caught in adultery. She has a speck in her eye. And so Jesus says, anybody here doesn't have any specks in your eye? Knock her out. But they do. And the reality is, we all do. We all struggle with that same condition of allowing ourselves to be honest about who we really are. And if we could just learn to practice what Jesus said, do unto others the way you want to be treated. If you just put the shoe on the other foot for a moment, if the roles were reversed, if all of a sudden that woman caught in adultery wasn't that woman, but it was you, how would you want to be treated? Do you want to be stoned to death, or would you prefer for somebody to show you some semblance of mercy and grace? Well, let's just be honest about it. We would know what we deserve, but we also know what we want. I want you to be merciful to me. When Jesus says, if that's what you want somebody to do to you, then that's how you should treat them. But we struggle with that, about allowing ourselves to be honest. And that's why Easter is so important. That's why Jesus plays such a pivotal role in our story. He says, do they condemn you? Nope, everybody's gone. And I don't condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin. We love the idea that Jesus doesn't condemn her, but Jesus doesn't need to condemn her. She already is. She is guilty of sin, just like we all are guilty of sin. Jesus doesn't need to condemn us. The law more than takes care of that for each and every one of us. We are guilty. If we could just be honest with ourselves, that is part of the problem, right? That we are guilty. But Jesus says to her, go and leave your life of sin. Now, just out of curiosity, how many of us have tried to do that? Well, if you take your faith seriously, you probably do it every single day. I don't think very many God-fearing people get up in the morning and think, well, I'm just going to go out and commit as many sins as I possibly can today. Most of us approach the day and feel like I want to try to live as godly as I can. I want to, when I talk to people, how I treat people, how I interact with people, the things I watch and I do, at the end of the day, I want to honor God in everything that I do, only to get to the end of the day and feel like, well, that didn't go real well. I really shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. I wish I wouldn't have looked at that. I wish I wouldn't have had that thought. I wish I would have never gone there. That whole thing was so stupid. And we're mad and are frustrated at ourselves because, well, we set out to go and leave our life of sin. We just didn't get it accomplished. The reality is, I don't think that surprised Jesus, because I think, if you will, to a degree, it's just part of the human condition that we struggle with sin. The Apostle Paul points that out to us in the book of Romans chapter 7, verse 15. It says, I don't understand what I do. For what I want to do, I don't do. But what I hate, I do. And how many of us would just say, amen? That's kind of how we feel like our lives are. We don't set out at the start of the day to, I want to go make the biggest mess I can make of my life. But at the end of the day, we look back and we're like, wow, I just made a considerable mess of things. Vast majority of the time, nobody knows. Every so often, you get drugged to the town square and you want to melt into the crowd, but you're not allowed to. Everybody knows. Everybody knows. And it's hard. And that's why Easter should mean so much to us as the children of God. Because we make a mess of things, don't we? Pretty routinely. And Jesus is like, I'm not here to condemn you. I'm here to clean this whole thing up. And that's the beauty of Easter. So we'll take a couple weeks and we'll talk about some fine messes that we make. But please don't let it get lost on us. This is our glorious hope. Easter is coming.